Amit is going to talk about the total cost of ownership of applications and how to calculate them. Certainly when you need to keep into account contract structures, discounts, and so on, and all of these challenges. And Amit is going to talk about this, so take it away, Amit.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I know that after 2 o'clock lunch, the pool is right there, so appreciate everyone coming up. My name is Amit, and I run Public Cloud FinOps at Citibank. And as part of that team, as an intro, I figured I'll tell the story of how I got into FinOps. And hopefully this story resonates with a lot of you. Previously, I was at a bank building out a credit card. And this credit card was going to be on public cloud. It was going to be infinitely scalable. We could build it really quickly. All the trappings of AWS or GCP. And as part of that, we wanted to build out many environments, right? We wanted our dev, UAT, production. Then we also wanted prod parallel, performance environment, a dev 2, in case dev 1 goes down, I guess, whatever. Because again, it's infinitely scalable. We can just keep building, doesn't matter. And then one day, we get the call, and I know everyone knows what I'm talking about, which is from the CFO, who says, what are you guys doing? It's costing too much money for you to do something that's not even in production yet, right? And so then we said, okay, let's go take a look. And you have to Google, where do I look at cloud costs? Okay, log into the AWS account. Don't have permissions. Okay, get them a week later and we log in. And I expected to see costs that were like dev X cost, UAT Y cost, so on and so forth. And instead what I see is like EC2, X million, Splunk, or rather, any other services like, Kinesis, Y million. And then making heads and tails of that, of understanding, well, where is this cost coming from? What do we do, right? In this instance was really difficult. And then also, we didn't really have any sort of SaaS companies that were ingested into Cost Explorer either, right? So if you use MongoDB Atlas, well, you have to log in somewhere else, and the same problem. You have a multi-tenant cluster, can't really tell what exactly is the cost there. And so when I joined Citibank, I joined the public cloud team, and we were building out a platform which would enable applications within Citi to go to the public cloud without doing a lot of the trappings that we wanted to do one time. Things like security, SDLC, observability, and FinOps is one of those things. So when I joined, I wanted to be on that team because I remember feeling so helpless in terms of not even knowing cloud costs, where to look for, but then B, even how to optimize them. So as the organization I'm in today, it sits in the CIO office and as part of the public cloud organization. So the mandate we have is not only the standard things like show back, cost optimization, but it's also building tooling for all the applications within Citi for application owners to be able to now use self-service to be able to handle things like understanding their cost, right? Understanding chargebacks, and making sure that these chargebacks are not, this might be unique to Citi. We charge back all our costs back to our different lines of businesses and applications. And so what we can't do is say, hey, your showback cost is $100, and then at the month end we charge you $200, because our application owners are relying on this data to be able to understand, are they doing what they expected? Was there an anomaly? So on and so forth there. So the responsibilities of our shared team is specifically around showback, chargeback, cost optimizations, and then also centrally purchasing commitments, right? Savings plans, RIs, so on and so forth there. And so let's talk about single pane of glass, right? How many of you guys have some version of single pane of glass today? Great, a lot of you. That's great. So when I think about a single pane of glass view, I really put myself back in the shoes of, as an application owner, I want to be able to see my cost in a way that's unified, right? It's not just AWS costs, it's not just GCP, but if my cost of an application has a MongoDB Atlas store, I have Snowflake for my data analysis, I use Akamai for my CDN, well, that's my application. It's not bifurcated, so why can't I see my cost in a unified view for that, right? I also expect that cost should be standardized terminology and metrics. Focus has really helped with that. There's a lot of good sessions happening today around focus. It should be timely, right? There's no point in getting data once a month if I need this data to figure out anomaly detection, right? It should be accurate, which goes without saying. No one wants to get an email that says, hey, we fat-fingered a zero, your cost is actually 3 million, not 30 million, right? And the business context is where it's an interesting one. And this one is really around, the cost itself alone is not a good barometer, because what if the revenue went really high and the cost went up a little bit, right? And the last one is explainable. I don't think anyone here wants an email that says, explain to me this cost, and you open up your Excel spreadsheet and there's like a ref data error, and then you're freaking out because the MD is freaking out there, right? So sounds pretty easy, right? Like it's pretty standard things we're describing, and it should be really, really easy to build this in a couple of months, or you go out to the vendor expo. I'm sure some vendor is going to say, oh, we can do all of those things for you. Just give us some percentage, right? And so what I want to do is almost like unpack this wish list of things that I consider to be SaaS or a single pane of glass view. And what I'll do is peel back the curtain, and this image itself is generated by ChatGPT. Clearly, there's no such thing as codal spending, but there's still AI work to be done there. So looking at one at a time, right? A unified view of CSPs and SaaS, right? The questions that often come up is it build, is it buy, or is it buy an augment? And oftentimes the reason is because a lot of SaaS vendors will say, oh yeah, we can offer you AWS, GCP, and Azure, and everything else figured out, right? And it doesn't really help when your application owner says, well, I went to your portal and it said I owed you $100,000 last month, and you charged me $190. And then you have to go explain, well, there's an asterisk, you have to actually include your MongoDB charges afterward. So it doesn't really help, right? Around focus, well, what about SaaS, right? Focus has done a really good job around things like, what is considered an application, what is considered metrics. But the SaaS is still the Wild West, right? And I think JR mentioned that this is something that's up and coming. But oftentimes what I've seen at SaaS vendors, what they'll do is they'll have, a vendor X dollar or buck or credit or whatever. And oftentimes it's not one-to-one, which you expect. It's that, something's 5 credits, $5 to a credit, but then you apply your PPA discount. So it's actually $430, unless you're in this region, and then it's $390. And you get everything in a credit, right? So trying to explain to a tenant that, hey, your cost is actually X credits, and you have to carry the one to figure out your cost is not great. Around timeliness, I think having work in observability or SRE areas, you kind of expect the data to come as soon as they have it, right? You don't wait for the next day to figure out your application went down. You get a PagerDuty alert immediately, right? But in the world of FinOps, what happens is each vendor kind of decides on their own, right? You have some that are T plus 2 hours, T being the time that a dollar was spent. Find out 2 hours later. Some of them might be T plus 1 day. Some of them are T plus 1 month. You just get invoice and they say, this is your invoice, figure it out. And some of them are yearly, right? Where you sign a contract up front and all you're getting is some piecemeal showback data. So it doesn't really give you the single unified view that you're expecting if all these things are occurring, right? Around accuracy, this is one of my favorite ones, right? You go to Cost Explorer, say you see $100, right? Then you go to your SaaS vendor that you're using, and it shows $87 because your PPA got applied there. And then when I give you a bill, it's $119 because I include a share cost along with direct connect costs, so on and so forth. So as an end user, you kind of lose value in a number. You don't trust anymore because there's always an asterisk associated with it, right? Around business context aware, and this is not a philosophical question, but what is an application, right? Is an application, imagine a platform that multiple different lines of business are using. Is that one app? Or is that each individual version of that app is its own app? What about an application that runs across dev and prod, but sometimes you have an ephemeral environment for testing, but that's a shared cost, right? So really defining that out and adding that context is not as easy as it sounds. And the last one is explainability. Some of the challenges we've seen is first mover disadvantages, right? We sign a contract with a new vendor, we have the first team who really wants to use it, and when they start using it, they get hit with all the charges, and they're like, why am I getting all the shared charges I wasn't expecting? And you have to explain, well, you're the first one on it, and hopefully other people join, but today you're gonna eat the full bill, right? And the other one is allocation of enterprise costs, right? You have these costs that are like the support charges that comes as one line item, or the direct connects between your data center and the colo, right? So they all keep adding up. And so the question becomes, okay, it's not easy, but it still sounds solvable, right? So what can we do? I mean, we could do nothing and just put our hands up and say, look, it's the way it is. One day, some vendor will solve it, and FinOps X will meet them and will buy them, and they'll take care of it. The alternative is you can do it yourself, right? And that's what we decided that, again, ChatGPT photo. We decided that a lot of the problems I'm describing are data problems, right? They're not problems with optimization. They're not problems with allocations or something. These are problems with the actual data coming in. And the fundamental problem is that the dollar that we say someone spent is not fully loaded yet, right? There's still the support charge, there's still the allocations, there's still X, Y, and Z adding. So we decided that we can almost like pre-treat our data, right? In a way that by the time it hits a golden source, we can do forecasting, we can do anomaly detection, and when an application owner logs in and they see their cost, they have full confidence that the charge that I'm showing today is a charge they'll be getting at the month end, right? When we actually recover those charges from the different teams there. And so what I want to do is kind of walk through 3 specific examples of this data activity that we've done, and almost like the recipes of how we go about solving these kind of problems, right? They're not exhaustive, and I want to emphasize these are problems that we may face at Citi, right? But we may not necessarily face them at a much smaller company when you're really worried about optimization. You don't really care about chargebacks, or you only do showbacks, and chargeback is a centralized function, so it may not really apply. Okay, so the first one I want to talk through is contracts with usage commitments, right? And the scenario is, you must purchase credits from a SaaS vendor up front. And in order to do this at a place like Citi, we're a platform of platforms. And so we go to these different application owners, and we ask them, what are you thinking for in terms of forecasts of using credits-wise for the next year, right? And so they come up with estimates, we add them up, and then we say, okay, we're going to purchase a contract here. Now, sometimes, if we're lucky, and we have a good sourcing department, we can roll over unused credits to the next year's contract, right? But that's not a given. So we kind of need to, and the other thing is that sourcing, we have to get commitments upfront from teams. The reason for that is what we can have happen is team says, yeah, we'll use 1 million credits next year, don't worry about it, just get the contract. And then year goes by and their dev team decided to go a different way, and now my team is left with the contract that's just unused. And at Citi, at least, we cannot be positive or negative, we have to be flat. And what that means then is we have to get financial internal commitments up front, right, from these teams here. And so the way to solve this, right, is what we've done is instead of saying, like, as a team, look, the credits that you purchase, say team A purchases 120,000 of credits, so 10,000 a month for a year. What we don't want to do is say, look, no matter what, we're just going to show you $10,000 as a line item. Who cares what you're using? It doesn't make a difference, you're already paying for it. Because we still want the showback and the optimization capabilities and the understanding, hey, we're using this stuff more and more every month, we should think about why. Or if you're doing a ramp-up period, what we don't want to do is say, we just charge you $10,000 a month, and you lose the context of, well, when we were in dev, we were only spending $1,000, but now we're in UAT, we're spending $4,000, why did that happen? You lose that, right? And so what we've done is, effectively, the solution we've come up with is we allow teams to carry over cost. Right? And what this really means is that, let's take my 10,000 example, right? A team has 120,000 commit for the year in credits, 10,000 a month, and in month 1, they know that they're going to go to dev, and by month 12, they'll be running dev UAT production, so they'll be far exceeding the 10,000 a month that we're allocating for them, right? So what we do is, we still amortize that 120K divided by 12, right? Every month, you pay your 10,000 as a line item, but for the unused portion, right, say in month 1 you use $1,000 only because devs, people are on vacation, they're at FinOps X, whatever, we keep track of that existing 9,000 that you didn't use, and we will put it into the carryover balance for them, right, programmatically, not like on manual or anything. And what we do then is we say, we know you have this carryover amount because by the time you're in production, you might be running 30,000 credits a month, but that's okay. We've been collecting the savings for you. And the nice thing is this way is it also gets our sourcing department the cash flow back, right? We still have to recover the full amount of the contract in a year, and we're not relying on a team that says, for example, the alternative to this might be, we'll only charge you the usage amount, right? It's pay as you go, the burn down. So if a team uses only 1,000 and we only recover 1,000, what'll end up happening is by year end, if they only end up using 20% of their allocation, they're going to get a sticker shock that says, oh yeah, the remaining portion of your bill is $80,000. Thank you so much for paying every single month. And all of a sudden they get hit with this bill, and then I get a call, and then I have to explain, well, this is why it happens, right? And then if they go over their usage, this is where it gets interesting, right? We'll burn down from the 10,000 first. We'll go into their credit pool that they've amassed over time, and then they still get charged only 10,000, and the credits are affected. Right? And then the use case of what I'm describing in production when you're running, you've exhausted your carryover. In any given month, what we'll do is we'll give you the charge for 10,000 and any overage for that given month alone. What we don't want to do is start exhausting your credits from the future for today's cost, because we want you to know that, hey, you're actually running more than you had predicted. right? So you still get your usage data in a normalized fashion, and this will be considered an amortized cost. And then there's an overage line which explains to you why this happened. And this will also help us with planning centrally that we're running low on credits, we should re-up, and then we already have the amount recovered from these teams that are going over there. The second example I have is contracts with fixed charges. And this is one of my favorites. The example is, a SaaS contract for large enterprises often is not just pay as you go, right? It's not the, hey, use a credit, you charge $1. There's also these things, right? There's like the mandatory training credits. Who's mandatory for? Why is it $100,000? We don't know. Or my favorite one, which is the shiny metal support, right? The platinum tier, quality support tier, which your company needs because you're an enterprise. And you can't remember the last time you opened a ticket with them, right? So the question becomes, well, how do you split this cost? It's a fixed cost. It's almost the cost of doing business at an enterprise. And what we want to make sure we do is we don't want to penalize the teams that were first. If a team joins, and there's 2 teams, and the cost is, again, $100,000 a month for these fixed costs, and we get their commitment, we sign a contract. If a team joins later on, we don't want to say, well, don't worry about those fixed costs. Those other guys already got it. You guys are good, right? It's not really fair. And what we don't also want to do is say, hey, almost like an insurance plan in health, sorry, this contract's locked, wait for next year. We don't want to disable teams from using vendors because of an issue with billing. It's not really, it inhibits growth there. So what do? We decided that instead of doing cost follows cost, that we're going to divide charges by N teams evenly, but reassess N every single month. So on the first month, if there's 2 teams, well, 50-50. If it's month 5 and there's 5 teams now, well, it's going to be 20% each. And this way, you don't have this first mover disadvantage happening. And what we're able to do then is it's an alternative to this concept of cost follows cost, right? And the reason we did that is that it's not really fair that if a team is the big elephant on this vendor platform, but they're super efficient, right? They optimize things all the time, but they still get hit with this massive bill every month because we say, well, you guys are the biggest spender, so you're going to get this bill, because they can't control it. They can't do anything about it except for look at it and say, well, it's a fixed cost. Why am I being burdened with it and no one else on the platform? And so we tell the teams, like, it's a cost of doing business. It is the shared platform fee for Citibank to use this vendor, and you just have to allocate it in your forecast and everything there. And then, the other thing it does is prevents a first mover disadvantage, right? You're able to now have teams join throughout the life cycle of the contract, and as more teams join, the cost of the shared the burden is reduced for every team starting that month forward. The last thing it does is, it adopts throughout the contract. So what we're not doing is limiting teams from sitting there and saying, I guess we've got to wait till December of next year to be able to use something that would be really beneficial to our team, but because the contract didn't work out there, right? The last example I have, and if anyone was in New York for the roadshow, I did a deep dive into this topic, and this one is around commitment-based discount sharing. And this one is specific to AWS, but it could really apply to anything, right? And the scenario is we have teams within Citi that are using very specific instances of, imagine an EC2 instance, right? Imagine like the AI team wants to use the P5 instances. They're $99 an hour, and we want to make sure that this team gets a savings plan credit on their account first. And the way you do that is you purchase at the linked account level and not the pair level. And the way it'll work is that the priority every hour is given to any eligible spend in that hour in that account. And if there's no eligibility, then we go to the rest of the organization, right? Sounds pretty straightforward. And so we have use cases, right? It's a bank that we run applications 24/5. Monday through Friday, it's a market risk assessment. And on the weekends, we have 48 hours of downtime. And so we scale down, right? We use Kubernetes. We're able to bring down nodes to 0. Everything's great. But we know that the savings plan in that hour is going to get charged, right? Every hour, unless there's an eligible spend. So what ends up happening is the purchasing team agrees. They know that the 48-hour dip, they'll still come out ahead, right? Even with 48 hours of dead time, they're still coming out ahead of on demand, right? Just because the math works out. It might not be the 37% they were promised, but it might be 14%, 15%, right? And then what ends up happening on the other side as a byproduct of this is that there'll be a team that comes in on Monday morning and says, look, cloud costs are so low on the weekends, we did it. They go to lunch, pat themselves on the back, tell their MD we did it, and they didn't really do anything, right? The savings plan engine decided almost like a luck factor of saying this account should get the savings plan today, right? Imagine there's 5 different teams using the same product in that hour. It's random, or maybe it's not random. Maybe someone from AWS can tell me how it works. But at the end of the day, what ends up happening is we have these uneven charges on both sides, right? You have a team that's paying for the savings plan every hour, and another team on the cash cost, it shows 0. And then they don't really know why, and we don't really explain to them why without having to like send an email out and explain to them, hey, don't put an anomaly on that. That actually is normal. And so what we did there was, again, we realized that what we can do here is we can adjust these charges. We can look at the charges and understand that in that given hour, a savings plan was used by someone who doesn't own that savings plan. And the way to adjust them, what we don't want to do is charge them list price, right? If the on-demand price is $20, we don't want to just charge them $20. They still got some benefit. It shouldn't be 0, but it should be something. And so what we end up doing is we charge them a discounted rate instead for that hour. We inject a line item for that hour, and we make it very clear that it's not just EC2 cost. This is a credit adjustment that we're charging you. And the story flips from why are you charging me excess to we're giving you a credit because you got lucky, but you should think about getting your own savings plan or using one of our shared savings plans we may have at the pair level for the specific instance and region there. And then we take that money and we give it to the SP owner itself, right? What we can't do is take that money and say, my team gets to now have pizza parties every day. We have to give this money back to the owner, but we explain to them this is not just an EC2 rebate. This is specifically because you got lucky that this weekend there was someone who wanted to use that instance, but it may not happen all the time. And they should really focus on bin packing better, right? Are there calculations they could do this weekend instead of waiting until Monday morning, right? And so while they're doing that, though, we're still getting the benefit to Citibank of the linked account sharing, and we're not penalizing the team that was supposed to only expected 17%. We give them overall net higher savings there. And then the benefit of the recipient is that we tell them, look, you got lucky. You know how you could get this luck all the time? Purchase your own savings plan. You don't have to rely on luck. You can just purchase it. Or, again, use one of the shared savings plans we may have. Now, before I get into what's next, I do want to highlight these 3 examples are really just examples of some of the data quality issues that are not inherent because of a CSP or a SaaS vendor. This is just enterprise stuff, right? And we don't, instead of relying on a vendor to come in and say, oh yeah, we can adjust this, we can fix that for you, a lot of this stuff is effectively just data quality that you can manage on your own. And because my team is engineering and product, we essentially look at the ETL as a way of saying, before the data hits a place where we start doing forecasting anomalies, we want to make sure we adjust these, not only so those forecasts are accurate, but our downstream teams aren't expecting, hey, your application showed me $100, but you're charging me the $120, right? Or your application said, I was pay as you go, but then you gave me this really massive charge up front. We're trying to make it that every single day, you can kind of expect that the cost you're seeing is what you're going to get charged at the end of the year. So what's next? For me, my favorite slide or picture from FinOps is a circle, right? Oftentimes when you think about development, you think it's start, finish, end, but it's really not in FinOps, right? Like now in the last year, a lot of people are concerned about things like multi-tenancy. And multi-tenancy in Kubernetes is a problem that's existed. But now what about when you use something like Vertex AI, right? You have one project. There's no taggability on Vertex AI. It's an API call you're making. But there's a guy in your building who's just sending 50,000-page PDFs all day, right? So you can't just even split that cost. It's not really fair. So how do we manage that? Same with the unit costs, right? At Citi scale, everything we do has to be scaled out without a human involved in it. Because what we can happen is that I work with a team that says, we are simple API, we have a database layer, we have a Redis cache, and we have something in the front. Can you help us figure out what the unit cost will be? We can do that, but my team cannot keep growing to support that. So what I'm really looking at is how do we build a pattern? If you're an API-based approach, you should have resource tags, obviously, but then you should also have, imagine a content header, which includes a request ID so you can trace it all the way back and forth, right? Give that as a recipe going forward. Same with queue systems, same with serverless, so on and so forth. So then teams are empowered to say, okay, if I want unit cost, my app fits into this bucket, these are the 4 things I should do, and then I can go and look at a single pane of glass and it'll start popping up there. And the last thing I'm looking at is FinOps governance as code. And this one is really interesting because what I find is we have governance already, which prohibits people from, say, deploying a new service from reInvent immediately, right? There's a lot of checks we have to do, security, we have to harden the module in Terraform, but more and more often what happens is the engineers, the actual EC2 as an example, we can whitelist to say, yes, you can use EC2 going forward, but the engineer is still responsible for the type, right? And now imagine an engineer, doesn't know any better and says, oh yeah, the P5 instance looks awesome, I want to do some AI stuff. Well, it's $98 an hour. He goes home for the weekend, comes back Monday, and then we're in this call with the MD saying what happened here. So instead of that, what I really want to be able to do is have governance as code which prevents those things from happening, and it tells you why it's happening. And if you still want to use it, this is what you have to do. Get your product person or your financial sponsor, agree to it, and then we can remove that block there going forward. I know tools like this exist already in the industry, but what I'm really finding is for every vendor that's out there solving a lot of these problems, there's no kitchen sink. Right? And so some of these things may be solvable by an open source product. Some of them might just be things we have to do documentation on, or some of these things might be things that we just don't have an answer for today. With that, I'll open up for questions.
Yes, thank you so much. Great talk. Absolutely. Thank you. Any questions? Over there. There are no runners, GR says. But I'll do it anyway.
You're right there.
There you go.
So I'm real curious around FinOps governance as code.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell and give some more examples around that?
Yeah, it could be things that as a team that's central, you start partnering with not just FinOps, but you think about a platform and you want to enable some services and enable specific flavors of those services, right? So we have that today in security, right? We don't allow, for example, OPA policies to have S3 buckets which are unencrypted. We don't allow, ALBs to be ingress only, which have open to the internet. We don't really have those kind of controls yet around FinOps, right? We can have buckets which don't have a lifecycle policy on them, right? Which is, again, not a security concern, but it's a concern for things that matter to cost. Right? So thinking about those things, and instead of always having a reactionary approach, where you kind of look at, some vendor which gives you all the data, and then you kind of find it, and then you go back, and you ask them, hey, can you fix it? Why don't we have advisory policies that are always updated? We say, hey, this is going to go hard mandatory soon. Get off of this instance, because we are now going to switch to AMD or Nitro. Right? So this way, at development, at part of the SDLC pipeline, you have that available instead of just afterward. And then you go into the whole, should we raise a Jira ticket? The team is not optimized to do this. It's going to take a while. We catch it before, so the shift left actually starts occurring.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah. I'll give it to you.
Similar to the question that she had around the FinOps as a governance. Two things. Which teams do you work with on FinOps as a governance, and what tool do you use yourself?
If I speak next year, I'll let you know, because we haven't started yet.
Okay, so it's something you're working towards?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I feel like a lot of the things you were saying, we're trying to do them, but we didn't call it FinOps as governance.
Right.
So now it's a nice name to it so that people can understand, but just want to know which teams we should focus to work towards.
I think architecture, I think the idea really is architecture. Right? You think about what should be prevented from being deployed, and not from a security context. Well, the owners of this application and the architects of this application, you go to them and you explain to them, well, did you know this cost is double if you use this? Do you really need this instance? Right? You almost like bringing awareness of FinOps at the architecture level. So when you're considering a new platform you're building, you can do some analysis and figure out, okay, we could do Lambda, we could do EKS or Fargate. What is the benefit that we're really looking for outside of performance? And cost becomes one of those things. And then you make it the default, and you let overrides happen. Right? There'll always be teams that are the exception, but you prevent this thing of, oftentimes finance is like, I have no idea what cloud costs even mean. What is an EC2 instance? And developers are like, we have to do this. It's like, no, you don't. You really don't need to be using this instance going forward there. Yeah.
You hear me all right? Oh,
Yeah.
There we go. So 2 parts. Interested in all the work you guys are doing in an effort to kind of break down those costs.
Yeah.
What kind of resource capacity do you need to accomplish that on a monthly basis?
Yeah, so we actually do it on a daily basis. And when you say resources, do you mean my team structure or?
Yeah, like how many resources does it take for you to be able to drive that level of granularity for your people?
So when I think about resourcing, I often find engineering is a precursor to really understanding FinOps, like pulling up the hood and not just doing click ops, right? Like a tool tells you to click a button, you're like, I guess I got to click it. But if you understand how EC2s actually work, how resourcing works, how Terraforms happen, or Terraform actually deploys code, it's much easier to find individuals who can learn FinOps than the opposite way around, where you learn engineering overnight, right? So I think, I can't say the specific amount, but it's under 10, right? And everyone I hire is really focused on the engineering side or the product side, and less on the sourcing or the financial side, yeah.
Hey, I have one quick question about unit cost. So how do you define the unit cost for two projects sharing the same backend, like Kafka or Cassandra, something? So how do you define the unit cost for each project if you want to do it?
That's a really good question, and that's something that, as we're building a platform, I can't answer. Right? It depends on the team, depends on if it's a multi-tenant cluster or not, depends on whether they consider this cost to be just the cost of doing business, or they want to use this to now drive revenue numbers and want to understand what they want to price out per million API calls or something. But what we can do is kind of give teams a tooling to say, here's an example project, and the way we got this data is because on every X request header that comes in, we had a GUID, and we trace that all the way down to Mongo, comes back up the stack, and then what we can do is, maybe using Splunk or Elk Stack, look at those number of 200 API calls at response time, and then work out from there, right? So there's really no silver bullet for unit cost that I know of.
It's kind of complex use case, yeah.
Exactly,
Thank you.
yeah. We've done it for some of our bigger applications, but it's not scalable, right? So when a lot of it, sometimes I feel like I want to automate myself, right? On the proverbial half-hour meeting where I'm explaining these things, and documentation's not enough, it's like, well, we kind of need code that kind of shows these recipes. So what we look at are the biggest applications that are running, and what we did, we turned them into case studies internally, yeah.
Hi, I wanted to tap more about the savings plan question.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm curious, are savings plan currently managed and purchased at the team level or centrally by a finance team or engineering team, and why is it that way?
Yeah, so we do today at the linked account level by the team. And the reason for that is we need a commitment internally that this team will continue using either the CSP itself or the region, or specifically the instance if you go down to that level. And in order to do that, this team also wants to benefit first, right? So if you purchase at the payer level centrally, what we don't get is any sort of commitment from somebody, and we can't guarantee this individual team account or accounts are going to get that benefit first. So of course we lose, imagine, a little bit of value because this SP engine would find the biggest savings every hour, but what we gain is now data actually makes sense, and the team that purchases SP is actually getting it there, yeah.
Cool. Any more questions? No? Well, a massive round of applause for Amit. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.